Some might say that if you're writing an academic essay, the introduction might be the most important part. That is, after all, where you catch people's attention and get them intrigued and involved with your topic. Kind of like how I'm doing my introduction for this video right now. And come to think of it, kind of a lot of pressure, right? So what do you do in these introductory situations? Well, this video will let you know 3 steps you can follow to create a powerful introduction for your essay that will get the reader interested and lead up to your thesis. All right, let's get started by talking about what typically goes in the introduction, which is often 1 paragraph, sometimes a longish one, in an academic essay. 2 things I want to point out before we get started. Number 1, these ideas are applicable in a school or academic setting. These ideas are not as useful if you're doing business writing. I'll put up a link for how to start an email if you were looking for business writing. For an academic paper, essay, journal article, lots of different ways you could use some of this. That's what we're looking at here. Okay, second thing, before we get into it, here's the secret to writing a good introduction, really. Write it at the end. Don't put it at the end, obviously. It's still going to go in the beginning, but it's hard to write an introduction to something before it exists. If your essay does not exist yet, it's going to be hard to write that introduction. I always write mine after I've already written my entire argument or narrative or whatever it might be. Okay, so the 3 steps we're looking at are bringing in the reader's interest, the hook, a middle section, which can look different according to different sets of guidelines and rubrics. So I'm going to offer a couple different ideas there, but essentially what we need to do after the hook is prepare the reader for your thesis using statements of importance or previewing your outline as different teachers, professors might have assigned. And then we'll end our introduction with our thesis. So let's take a look at how to start on your hook. Here is a hook and an entire example, pretending like I'm writing an essay on the topic of hunger here in my hometown in Sacramento. I am not using accurate research here. I'm using general findings, but I'm not quoting anything. This is merely an example to show those 4 steps. But you can see that the hook is intended to interact with you, the reader, right? And so the whole purpose of our introduction is to get our reader not only interested, but prepared for our argument. So first we've got to bring them in. A lot of different ways to do that we'll look at in a moment. Let's hear it all in action first. Have you ever faced hunger? If not, you're luckier than over 287,000 people in Sacramento. To solve the hunger crisis, our city must come together and find the needed resources to turn this trend around. Although Sacramento faces growing challenges with hunger and poverty, we can help as a community by supporting food banks and voting to support community education. And you can see from the labels where I was at in those different chunks. The hook bringing people in, the middle getting people ready, and the thesis putting forth our central argument. So you have a few examples when it comes to creating that hook. Any way that would bring in a reader, and think about that concept of interacting with them, where they're answering in their mind or having a reaction in their mind, almost as you would interact in a conversation. That's what we're after, that feeling for the reader of, oh, I've just heard about this and I'm definitely interested. So we want to also get them on track, kind of getting amped up. What is this topic? What are we getting ready for? Typically, and I've heard from some of you, that your teachers, your professors are asking you to use an anecdote, like a story or a quote to open. I often hear folks also using a question or some kind of intriguing fact. These are all good ways to interact with the reader and kind of show them, why is this topic applicable and interesting to them? Why would they want to read more? A few examples here. Again, I'm falsifying the names of newspapers. I'm making things up just to not, be using people's real things for these examples. National Climate News recently found that 77% of glaciers have shrunk by 41% in the last decade. That would be a hook where my goal is that the reader goes, oh no, I need to learn more about this. This is sounding pretty devastating or pretty serious at least. interesting and important. The second one is an example for those of you who've been asked to write a narrative essay. You still want to do these steps to bring in the reader, even if you're writing about yourself or writing in the first person in general. When my family went back to visit Vietnam, the impacts of climate change were clear. I'm beginning a story, and now this person can go on to explain what did they see during this trip, and I'm already curious. Or I could do a question. Did you know much of the world now lives closer to the sea than they did 5 years ago? And we're thinking our reader might say, ooh, I wonder why. I need to learn more. So in all these instances, we're trying to meet that goal of bringing in interest, bringing in sort of dedication, commitment, buy-in to your topic. So we've hooked our readers' interest. They want to learn more about the topic. Now our job is to help them get a little bit educated in the background and prepared for what's coming. There are a few different ways to do this, but we need to take the reader from our hook, why are we interested, to our argument, the thesis. And so our goal here is to ready and prepare that person's mind to be ready to receive your argument. You may have, and I've heard from a couple of you, that you have specific instructions on your rubrics from your teachers, from your professors. If you've been asked to use statements of importance, statements of purpose, background to show why your hook is important, why your thesis is important, this slide will be helpful, hopefully, for you. And then on the second slide, we have step 2B, the other option, where many of you have told me that you are asked to preview the outline of your paper. And so you could do either of these as that middle step. And our goal in either way that we choose to do it is to show the relevance and make sure the reader knows this is impactful, this is consequential, this matters. And so with this technique, to show what matters, I'll suggest we write one sentence offering the context and using many or most of the 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, why. Which of those does your reader need to know the context about in order to understand what your thesis says? So what we're doing here is offering everything the reader needs to understand that thesis when it comes. Climate change has impacted X% of coastal cities in Southeast Asia in the past 2 decades. Perhaps I had my hook about my story. I went to Vietnam. Now I'm explaining more and leading to my thesis. Or the second one could go with the hunger topic. To overcome this crisis, Sacramento will need strategic and empathetic leadership. Or this trip back to Vietnam taught me about my parents' difficult emigration to the US, if it's a narrative essay. So in all 3 ways, we've helped the reader prepare for the coming thesis, but we've also shown them a little more. What's the context? Are there some kind of when, where, why that you need to know? And do you need any other background to be ready to receive and understand that thesis? So now we'll look at that middle step done a slightly different way. If your rubric, your professor are asking you to do a preview of your outline of your paper, and thank you, friends, for letting me know that's kind of information so I can try to make the best videos for you. If you need to do that, here's 2 ways to do it, and there's a second screen of examples coming. What I try to do in these situations is either use a list of what's coming up or talk about the topic a little more thematically. I've heard from some of you, and I have to say I agree, that it can feel repetitive to have to outline your paper in the intro, then explain it all, and then repeat it a 3rd time in the conclusion. Not all readers like that, but many do, and that's the standard for many papers in various countries. So we want to know how to do it. If you feel, though, like you might be getting repetitive, this is where I think you can look for a theme and describe your outline a little bit more conceptually versus literally. So you'll see kind of different versions of how literal or how conceptual or abstract these are with the coming examples. And so we would imagine any of these going between the hook and the thesis. Sacramento can invest in education and housing to address this crisis. When we invest in education, we invest in the future. By providing adequate housing, we help set up our community for success. I can look in those sentences and see that there will be paragraphs on all those things. And if you're feeling repetitive, even though I do have a list, When I talk about those items later, if I've said invest in education, I can just at least say it slightly differently, right? When we support measures that boost education, right? I can try to express it differently. The second one is a little more thematic. Visiting the country my parents were born in taught me about my history and will help shape my future. We do know that there's an outline coming that will have this person looking back and looking forward. But it's only that level of outline, right? So we know, well, let's get ready to think about our pasts and our futures as we read this paper. So 2 more examples of this preview idea, and I would encourage you as you listen, think about what paragraphs are coming. Will I know by reading this introduction what paragraphs, what topics are coming my way? Because that is what we want. Again, we want the reader to be ready. And so even if we feel repetitive, we can try to use different language or be thematic, but we do care about getting the reader ready for that thesis. So let's see how these ones work. To address rising electric rates in the 2020s, the country can invest in solar and wind power. New solar and wind installments also bring jobs. I'm sensing a paragraph or a section of the paper ahead about employment, right? By investing in this sector of our economy, we can reduce unemployment and poverty simultaneously. Again, you can look in there and kind of imagine as a reader, what will I be learning throughout this paper? I still haven't done my thesis yet, but I've gotten readers ready. Similarly, because 65% of residents do not have food security, more needs to be done. Studies have revealed, I'm sensing I'm going to get some studies as I read this paper, that changes in the agricultural, transportation, and retail sectors can also make an impact, which now we're imagining the essay will visit those different sectors or industries and consider how that they can make an impact. All right, so let's talk about the thesis itself, and then we'll look at one more example of the steps in action. So we have a goal with our thesis, right? Make sure the reader knows what position we are taking within this topic. We've already hooked their interest, given them some background, helped them familiarize themselves with why there would be an argument to be had, why there's a topic that needs to be argued about or discussed or proven or shown. And now our job is to state that clearly and concisely, right? So what I try to do is make sure I've stated my topic and then also stated the importance. I'm not going to say this is important because, but I will state the topic in such a way that it also shows relevance or importance or even controversy or a perspective, right? As an opinion, a side that we're taking. By investing in eco-agriculture by 2025, California can further reduce its carbon footprint. We know I'm going to be talking about eco-agriculture, but I've given a reason why we would care about that topic, what it could do for us by reducing our carbon footprint. Returning to the country of my parents' birth gave me insights and perspectives that will shape my life going forward. We know that we were not only going to hear about the experience going home, we're going to hear about the impact on somebody's life and the emotional understanding of their life and their future. To reduce infractions, the industry can take steps X and Y. We want to reduce mistakes, infractions, errors, whatever they are. Here are my 2 ideas for how to do that. All right, so let's look at one more example where we see all these steps working together to get that reader right into your essay. Looking at the transportation sector with this example, you'll see that I sort of did a mix in the middle there between the hook and the thesis to show how you can use those 2 ideas to get the reader prepared. Freeway accidents in the central area, I made that up, have increased by 25% since the pandemic. We can imagine it would be true. Driving has changed, right? Studies point to changes in how we interact with one another as a potential cause. After spending up to 2 years in isolated circumstances, people's attitudes and focus have changed. We now do less defensive driving and see more road rage. To make our freeways safer, our city should invest in A, B, and C. In real life, I would have specific things to say there, of course. What we see happening here is I've asked this person to care about the topic. I've previewed what's coming, right? We'll talk about What's happened since the pandemic? What are these potential behavioral changes? What are we seeing on the roads? But I haven't said specifically exactly what I'm going to list. And I did that so that I won't feel as repetitive. It's thematic. It's about social change, cultural change. And then I get right to my thesis, where my hope is that by that time the reader wants these solutions because I've led up to that and that's what they're looking for. All right, please let me know how these steps go for you. If you have more questions about this, I'm happy to answer them. Just let me know in the comments. All right, I'll talk to you really soon. Great, best of luck with your academic essay introductions. All right, see you soon. Have a great day.